Well, hey everybody, Wes McDonald here for Level Up Live, and as always, I'm here with my good friend Kenneth Edmonds. How are you, Ken?
I am fine. How are you doing today? Are your teeth better?
Yes, they are actually, and thanks for bringing that up. That I did. I was supposed to go in for a root canal and a crown, which I was not excited about, but by the time they got in there, it was actually an extraction. So, yeah, now I've got a hole in my mouth. I love the wonders and joys of aging. But yeah, I feel great. The
That's
pain.
good. Because last week you were suffering a little bit.
It was awful, man. I cannot believe. And you know what? It's not so much the pain of actually having it done, right? Like your head is being jarred around and stuff, but it's kind of just the idea of someone inside your head. I mean, that's where they are. They've got their hand inside your head. There's somebody trying to help out. They're jostling you around, and then you hear, "Uh-oh." I'm like, "Uh-oh, you can't talk." Yeah, the tooth was cracked in a couple of places from an auto accident. I was actually in my early 20s. I was a victim of a hit and run, and so the tooth was not salvageable, but there we are. So if anyone else has dental horror stories they want to share, please feel free. As always, we like to get you to join the conversation with your comments. And as we go through today, we're super excited by our guest today, who we'll bring in a couple of minutes. We're going to talk about some of the real numbers in the printing industry, where they were and where they're going, and some other statistics that are, quite frankly, Ken, super important for people to make some decisions with their business going forward, right? We've seen a lot of people talk about the numbers and make predictions and projections, really, based on their best guesses, right? So, I feel, and today we're going to get some real numbers behind that. And I can see you put up your thing there. So one of the other things we like, just as much as comments and questions.
Where are you watching from? Because we do have a global audience. It was kind of interesting. Recently, I had somebody that asked for a link to a show they'd missed, and they were not from this country. And so it's always nice to see where around the world our audience is joining from. So put that in the comments as well, as always.
Yeah, let us know where you're from. And Ken, I'm just as fascinated by that, right? That we have some that are in the United Arab Emirates, some that are in the UK. We've had guests in from Australia. We've had some in from France, obviously some from Canada and the US, right? So it truly is a global audience. And of course, we've got one of our friends down in your neck of the woods, Fort Myers, Florida. What's going on, Greg Walters? Thanks for your help yesterday with the Leadership Awards. And actually, I'm going to go over those here in a second. And it looks like we got Mr. Chris Pollock. How are you, Chris? Been a long time. I look forward to seeing you at another event very soon in New Jersey. I'll be headed out your way, actually, to New York City on the 14th through the 17th, I think, for a security alarm conference, which is pretty exciting. Got a link to Gingers. You can't see their name there, but they're from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Welcome. And Jamie, thanks for coming in from Minnesota today. We got Dave in from Memphis, Tennessee. Another one of my favorite spots. And Daryl Davis, another New Jersey. Looks like New Jersey's taking the count today. And of course, Greg again from Florida, because Greg, as you'll see, there he is on LinkedIn, and there he is on YouTube. He watches us on both platforms because he's incredible. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. And for everyone else, make sure you continue to ask your comments as we go through.
Ken, I guess my question for Greg is does he have audio from one stream in one ear and audio from the other stream in the other ear?
Yeah. Yeah. Only those that know, right? And just give me 1 second. I'm actually going to pull something up. We had the Leadership Awards yesterday for those that did get to see them. We were super excited to be able to announce the winners for the Managed Print Service Association Leadership Awards. I did have
say hi to OJ while you're pulling that up there. Hey, he's joining us from Alexandria, Virginia.
Good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining in. All right, so I'm going to quickly try and pull this up. I'm not sure why I closed it, but it's been one of those days, Ken. This for me has been like a Monday on a Wednesday. And let's see, we're going to open. Is it this one? I don't know. We'll see. We'll work with this one anyway. And let's open with Google Slides. Thank you. Let's go to slideshow. Thank you. And for everyone listening to my thinking out loud, here we go. So we had the Leadership Awards yesterday. It was a ton of fun. Really great to see all of the winners. And Ken, as you know, I'm very passionate about the Managed Print Service Association and volunteerism in general. And a big shout out to Eric Crump. If you're out there watching today, he actually won Volunteer of the Year. And I'm not sure if anyone's ever worked with Eric, but like he works like 3 people, right? For the stuff that he does for obviously professionally, what he does for the Young Marines, and what he does for the MPSA as well, right? So big shout out. If you get a chance today, make sure you say congrats to Eric and for all the hard work. And just going to go straight to the winners. So Tiger Paw Software, Ken, you know that they've been working hard on both introducing software platforms for office equipment dealers in combination with what they're doing for managed IT providers and MSPs and security and alarm and other verticals. So yeah, it was a heavy category this year, and that's their 5th time in a row winning. So clearly the work that they're doing is paying off. In Time Tech, Mr. Anthony Chen, big shout out to you. Honorable mention, that was a close second. And this is new for the MPSA this year, is getting the actual runners up, because there are so many submissions, Ken, and some of them are so close, like literally 1 or 2 points apart, that it's important to make sure they're recognized. ACDI, David Brown was in yesterday, Best MPS Professional Service Provider. We had a good laugh yesterday. I hit the ceiling on the number of people I could actually have in the stream. So he couldn't get in, and had basically, thank goodness, one of the other people on the stream was good enough to act as my liaison in the background, as I had to kick people out once they received their awards to make room for others. So thanks for your patience, David, and congrats on the award for ACDI. Chip Maselli, this guy is everywhere all the time, right? Pulse Technologies, the stuff that he does. And this was a very close second place. Great American Financial Services Predictive Insights, for those that don't know, Ed McLaughlin and Josie Hess, they are powerhouses, and the work that they've done together to be able to provide e-commerce solutions for the industry, they're doing phenomenal stuff. And Ingram, also, look at the number of labels here. Like, it's crazy, right? ACDI, Great America, Zebra, and CIMAC all coming together to offer some pretty cool solutions for basically when you think of thermal printers or label printers and being able to use them in a managed print environment. So very cool stuff. Ysoft, for the cloud innovations that they're doing in the space, they were judged to receive the Best MPS Innovation Award. And really nice to talk with Stephanie yesterday. Obviously worked with some of the other folks there. So a big shout out to everyone at Ysoft. Great America came up with the honorable mention for this one. And, they submit for more awards, Ken, and they win more awards every year. They do such a great job of their submissions. And for anyone submitting awards, thoroughness counts, right? It's almost like a business plan. And Ken, I know you'll be speaking on this very shortly on the 8th, right? Changing your business planning strategies. And Great America is probably a good one to talk to for that as well. As is our guest today, which I'll bring in just another minute. Total Print USA got Best Independent MPS Provider. Brian Harris, it was really great to meet with you and to congratulate you yesterday in person. Milner, Nathan Gerber, just a staple in the space, right? Just such an incredible MPS expert and specialist, and friend of the industry. So congrats on the honorable mention. And of course, we could never get away without seeing DM Distribution Management here. They do such a great job of adapting to these changing conditions. Sarah Custer was there to receive the award. And Ingram again came in for honorable mention for the work that they're doing as well, right? Just another giant in the space. So, woo, there we go. That was the rocket round. So if you have any questions about the MPSA, we'd certainly love to have you reach out to us. It's quite easy. You can just go to yourmpsa.org. You can talk to Ken. He's a member. You can talk to myself, et cetera. So moving along, very excited to go on with the topic at hand now. And we're going to talk about the real numbers, Ken. So I'm just going to introduce Wes McCarter here. Hey, Wes, how are you?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Really nice to see you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us in our live stream today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I'm actually going to bring something else up here because you were part of the Top 100 initiative that I work with on a weekly basis. And it was actually brought up last week. We were talking through some of the numbers in our Top 100 session, right? And congrats, anyways, for being on this list. And really for doing the work, because being on a list is one thing, but you're there every week. Like the weekly call I have is they show up, as frequently or infrequently as you can, and you're always there and bringing value. And I just can't thank you enough for that. So if anyone is not connected with Wes, you better do so. He's one of the most influential people that I know, certainly in this channel. And just one heck of a guy. And today, he's actually got some numbers to share with us. And what was brought up last week, if you remember, Wes, was we were looking at some of these projections, right? Like, I know that I'm not going to name names, but some of the OEMs that were talking about 85% volumes coming back post-pandemic. There was obviously some skepticism in the call last week. We heard some people talking about maybe 60% volumes. I've heard other people, say it's even going to get worse, right? That we've hit a peak. And the truth is, we can talk about it all day long. But if we have numbers, if we know somebody who's actually monitoring devices and has been doing so for years,
right,
probably a better use of our time. And I think that's you.
I am thinking he knows a little bit about copier and print volumes in our industry.
Yeah,
just a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. So Nextera, obviously, previously BEI, you've been around forever, and the database that you have, maybe you can just give us a little background, first of all, for our viewers on, the number of devices and things like that you're actually monitoring.
Yeah. So, we started in 1993, before the internet was actually a thing. It existed, but not at a level that the average user could use. So we were a little pre that for having big data. We're currently running about 4.5 million serial numbers that we're tracking every month. That includes 4 of the major OEM, all their direct operations, as well as a large suite of the kind of who's who in the BTA channel of the dealers. The primary goal with having the data originally was about identifying where there was opportunity to improve. Is it a machine issue? Is it a technician issue? Because back in the day, as a manufacturer's rep, we were kind of trained to tell them it's we've never seen this problem before. You're the only one that's having it. And there was no way for a dealer to know for sure, is it them or is it the equipment, right? There's no way to tell. So our data set started becoming the standard to say, here's what the machine is capable of, and here's where you are relative to that average, right? And then also what's possible, right? Where can you go with that? We made the assumption that if you had the data told you what was wrong, that most people would do something about it. We learned quickly that that's not always the case. So then we started evolving into more solutions-oriented products that help the dealers manage the people that have to ultimately end up delivering the results. So almost all of our products now are related to managing of that staff and making sure they're getting the maximum performance out of that staff for profitability. But within the context of that, it's ultimately the data that drives all of that. So that's where all this information we'll share this morning is coming from.
Yeah, and I keep popping out because I want to make sure that you have the real estate that you deserve as you're talking today. But I know that this one, when you talk about making sure people are obviously as well utilized as they can be, that's something that's near and dear to Ken's heart, right? Because that's what he has done for years. That's where his expertise is as a service manager, right? So some phenomenal work there. And so when you're looking at these numbers, I guess like you said, there are some side benefits to it. Maybe you can tell us what the numbers looked like pre-pandemic and then what they look like sort of post-pandemic, just as a bare sort of bare number.
Yeah, so let's kind of set the framework here a little bit. The data that I'm presenting is not 100% of our data set, because in order to maintain continuity, I had to use only data that existed inside that entire time frame. So I'm looking back to like 2019 to date, right? So within that, we have new customers that come in, some customers that leave us, although not very many. But I have to maintain that integrity. So all of this data is relative to customers that were in the data set the entire time frame, right? So that way the movement isn't related to some big customer coming in or somebody leaving or that type of thing. So pre-pandemic, we were doing about 12 billion pages a month in our customer base. So, I mean, obviously that's a huge number of pages every month. When the pandemic kind of bottomed out, meaning the lockdowns were kind of at their peak, it had dropped to 3.2 billion.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
A huge impact. And then as we started coming out of the pandemic, we obviously saw those pages start to rise again. They peaked in November of 2021 at 10.6 billion. And then started a month-over-month decline that stayed there until August of 2022. So it was literally it peaked, and then it was like everybody either came back to the office, caught up with their printing, and then stopped, or the business processes that they had been using while they were remote kicked back in, right? And they started doing it again. So we saw this decline all the way up to August of 2022, where it dropped to 7.7 billion. So we lost 3 billion pages in that time frame just through changes in work environment. Then September kicked in, which is obviously for a lot of our customers, major account schools, right? So
Right.
September and October started coming back, and it went up to 9.2, and it's kind of peaked at that number at the moment. We'll see what happens in November, but currently it's at 9.2. So we're still a little over 3.8 or 3.2 billion pages off of where we were at the top.
Well, and so you think about that, that's what 25% or so loss of clicks, over that period of time. And you would expect now we're pretty much back to completely, everybody's wide open back to working. So that seems that could be an indication of the trend line going forward. What do you think on that?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens as a function of obviously we expected, and we see those seasonal bumps like for schools when they come online, and the kids are back in, the teachers are printing and they're doing all those things. So we see that as a trend overall. What's interesting is the trend didn't come back as fast as we expected it to, meaning that the average monthly volume per unit is down across the board. So while the unit placement is there, right? So we're seeing roughly the same number of units and seeing growth in that, because you have to remember in our industry, we flip 98% of our customers. So unit count doesn't change all that dramatically, but the page volume per unit is what's changing. So there's not fewer devices printing, the devices that are there are printing less.
Yeah.
Right.
So and then let me just ask a question on that, because that interests me a lot. And I don't know if you pulled it out this way, but I'm wondering the impact per segment, because I know that in some of the other data I've seen that the overall pages are not declining as bad, but what we're seeing is there's a lot more pages shifting up to the very high end and out of maybe some of it out of the office environment. But they're and they're like Konica KM1s and some of the high-end Ricos and that kind of equipment, is their page volume might be increasing a little bit, but the office may be different. So I'm just curious, did you look at it? Is that a question you have an answer for?
Yeah, I was actually looking at the page size, because we're always concerned with this A3, A4 transition that's occurring. So I was particularly looking at what was happening with the A3, A4. So pre-pandemic, the A3 page volume was averaging about 13,000, not quite 14,000 pages a month, right? So that was the A3, right? Now it's dropped down to less than 11,000 pages a month.
Wow.
We've lost about 2,500 pages or so a month on A3 page volume across the entire population of product, right? While A4 didn't change at all. So what that's saying is that A4 is in the same environment it's always been in, which is that desktop remote worker, and didn't change their print volume behavior all that much, but then turned around and the A3s were obviously impacted because people left the office and that's where those boxes lived. So they just couldn't simply print as much, right? So, that's an interesting thing. But when you talk about just that 2,000 pages a month, across my population, that's 1.7 billion pages a month that's gone.
Oh,
that will probably not ever come back.
Yeah, and for the most dealers that are especially in the A3 space, losing that, because those are typically fairly profitable devices. So they've lost pages I look at from a service perspective, declining volume is the worst thing that can happen to devices. A level volume and a declining number of units is much more profitable, because so many dealers operate their equipment in places and in volume bands that they're not very profitable to start with. Now we start reducing those volumes on a per device. That's just going to make them more expensive per page.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to come in with is, it's another thing that I've been paying attention to is kind of the fallout from the CHIPS Act, right? And some of the things that are happening now, we're still going to see some fallout. We've already had supply chain issues with chips and processors for units. And speaking with some of my friends in the OEM market, they said it's not rocket science, right? That the chips are going into the devices that make them the most money, which are, by the way, A3 devices. So even if they're not necessarily the right fit for what the customer's looking for, it's what's available, right? Are we seeing that? Are we seeing any placements, or are we seeing quite a healthy sort of install base in the A4 as well?
Well, obviously we saw in let's say 2019, A3 was about 67% of our database, right? And today it's 48%.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a pretty significant shift. Obviously, that remote worker was requiring devices. So the dealers were very apt to provide those devices for those remote workers to work. The page volumes that they were running is still relatively small. What was interesting is that when I was at the CDA meeting here a couple of weeks ago, and dealer profitability in some cases actually improved because the machines that they had in the field, because of back orders and shortages in the supply chain, couldn't put new units out. And the units that were out there are kind of, we have this really weird anomaly where we replace the machine at the point where it's actually the most profitable.
Yeah.
From a perspective, right? Because the customer knows what they're doing, the supply chain for parts and labor is all working, techs know what they're doing, and then we replace them because they've hit that 3 or 5 year lease cycle number, right? Well, without able to sell new machines, they had to keep those machines in the field until such time as they received them, right? They actually probably made more money on those machines during that time frame than they did at the beginning of the contract.
Well, it's a really important lesson though, right? And it's not the first time I've heard it. I can remember during the pandemic, I was speaking with some dealers, and when offices were closing down and they were, what was the term they used? Furloughed? Not laid off. Laid off's a terrible word, right? But furloughed or whatever that is. And they said, Wes, I got to tell you, we've had to, put a lot of folks, kind of out because we're not getting the page volumes and on that equipment. Exactly to your point, because we're so good at it, it takes fewer people to maintain that fleet. We've never been more profitable, right? So I've heard those stories. Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. And Ken, you're going to be speaking on changing sort of business model strategies next week, right? And that's kind of cuts to the heart of that, which is the kinds of numbers, Wes, that you're sharing, what you've seen out there. It really does speak to, this idea that there has to be a change. I'm not going to say a wholesale change because that's a little draconian, but there has to be a change in how we kind of approach the market, right? Is that fair?
I've been saying that for quite a few number of years. And part of what drives me to that conclusion is when we developed our process back in '93, one of the things that was an assumption, but there was no data to prove it, was that machine performance was volume sensitive, meaning that there were some machines that worked really well doing 5,000 pages a month and other machines that did not like 5,000 pages a month, just for an example. So we kind of pioneered this idea of let's group these machines by different volume tiers or bands and see how they perform, right? Because we knew that if you put the wrong machine in the wrong environment, you were going to get excess service cost, or you weren't going to produce enough revenue to offset that service cost. So we created these volume tiers. And so the first two things that were stark out of this pre-pandemic component is that when pre-pandemic, 44% of all of the equipment in my database lived in the very first volume tier out of 12.
Wow.
Right? So just a statistical grouping. They all live down there. But pre-pandemic, I'm going to make sure I've got my numbers right. Those machines were doing about 1,800 pages a month on average in that first volume tier. And that's across all segments, right? So that's just grouping them where they live. So a high-end duplicator might have a volume tier. That first volume tier might be 10,000 to 25,000 pages a month, whereas a A4 might be 100 to 500. But that's still the first tier, right? So I'm just averaging that whole first tier group. Today, that first tier, it's still 44%, but it's dropped to 880 pages a month.
Holy wow, that's huge.
Yeah, and so I want to interject on this because this is something that I have seen and something that is, I talk to the students in my service management class. It's something I preach to dealers when I have a chance, is that we've got to stop misplacing equipment because, too often the at the higher levels, they don't understand the impact. And the sales guy, the part of it is where the carrot's in the wrong place. The sales guy makes more money selling the high-end machine, even though that's the worst possible placement for the dealer. And so that piece of it's broken as well.
So let me prove that. So I did a data set where I was looking at a monochrome, black and white. We call it digital segment 4, which is 41 to 69 page per minute units, right? In my data set today, 63% of all of those units live in the first volume tier and are doing 970 pages a month. Right? There isn't an A4 made that won't do 970 pages a month, right?
And be more profitable.
Probably so, but what's happening is that when you look at obviously you have minimums, there's a potential, right? But if you're looking at what you're billing for 970 pages a month, it's going to be really hard to generate enough revenue to offset even the baseline PM costs.
Yeah.
On that size machine, right? So I looked at Mono A4, which is the same basic speed range of machine, right? But it's primarily inkjet. 57% of those machines live in that first volume tier and are only doing 469 pages a month. So about half the same number of pages. But when you think 63% of all of the mono segment 4 product out there are only running less than 1,000 pages a month, that's a scary place to be, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I agree. And Andy posted this question, and it's really interesting. It says, our company's raising the maintenance pricing due to lowering volumes. And here goes back to your point about more profitable when they didn't upgrade. In most cases, what I see in dealers, and again, one of these things that just makes me insane, is that when they replace a machine, the way they justify replacing it is they drop the service rates to the current for that volume or for that machine. So they drop the service rate and put it in a place that's not profitable, and everybody but the sales guy loses again.
Well, I mean, they've obviously got built-in escalation so that the machine they're replacing has gotten more expensive over the 5 years. So they can come back in and show them that by saving them money, they can lower the price by lowering the rate again. But inherently, there's more cost involved in the first 2 years of that placement than we're on that older machine, right? Because we don't necessarily know what parts we have in stock. Not every time. So there's the part the technicians have to get trained and get comfortable with the product and what it's doing. The customer has to learn all of the new bells and whistles and things. So inherently, that first couple of years has cost built into it that otherwise might not be there just for that reason.
Yeah, and I wonder if Andy was asking specifically, and Andy, maybe you can clarify because I'm going to put words in your mouth, but are you asking if people are deliberately raising those maintenance rates just given kind of the current situation? Don't beat up sales guys, Greg Walters.
Yeah. And so I want to say this, and I am not beating on the sales rep, Greg, because every one of us in our lives works to our comp model. The problem is that nobody, let me rephrase that. Back when this comp model we use today was put in place, it was a good workable comp model. It just hasn't evolved as the industry has changed. And that's what's so important is that we start to think about that. Wes and I were working on putting together a webinar about compensation, because if we could get, and I'll have to say this about Wes's product too. I am a super fan. I encourage everybody, if you haven't done so, and this is not because Wes is here. It's just I tell this to everybody I talk to, is understanding your numbers and being able to see accurate data is the key to success in this industry. There's never been an industry other than maybe manufacturing where knowing what your numbers look like is more critical to being able to make wise decisions. And Wes has a comp model that I love because it focuses the technicians' attention on the things that make the dealership profitable. And so they put the carrot exactly where it's supposed to be. But with the sales team, we haven't done that. We haven't said, okay, how do we create a sales program that rewards the sales rep for selling the right device in the right spot and maintaining the print or the service pricing?
Well, it's a good segue because OJ Coleman just put a comment there about how these lower volumes, and I'd actually say the predictability of declining volumes makes a flat rate program an excellent option, right? And Ken, we've worked with dealers to get those comp plans in place to change those behaviors. I love Greg. Come on, Ken, you hate salespeople, admit it.
Yeah. I don't hate salespeople. I just hate the results of what they do to the service team. And Andy, I love Andy's comment there.
Yeah, he says raise the rates because we're not making the profit amount. Oh, yeah, not margin. I'm not sure if Wes can answer that question or not. That's a tough one.
Well, I mean, obviously, most of the business that was written pre-pandemic and during the pandemic were all contractual, so it's hard to just go in and blanketly start raising rates without, other than the built-in escalators, right? The change is happening, and I'm glad somebody brought up the flat rate, as you and I are all big proponents of that. The thing that the data points out is that the number one reason dealers don't go to flat rate is because they're worried about the customer changing their print behavior as a function of the billing model, right?
Right.
But when you look at 44% of all the machines being in the first volume tier, right, averaging 900 pages a month, what are they going to do? Go to 100?
Yeah.
I mean, even if they did change, the number would be minuscule, and the amount of money we save on the administrative side of not having to collect meters and not having to bill meters and correct invoices and reconcile and blah, blah, all of that goes away as a function of flat rate. And
it does. And yeah, you and I are exactly on the same page. We've had conversations about this, and I liken the fear, as you've just mentioned. It's not based in reality, right? And it's one of those things where, the horse is already out of the barn, right? People are printing the way that they want to, unless they have some kind of rules-based, sort of applications in house anyway. So, the horse is already outside of the barn. We're not changing anything.
Right.
I've never once gone into the office and said, I can't wait to get into the office today because now printing is unleashed. I can print whatever I want, right? That has never entered my head. And I don't think anybody said so.
Yeah.
We do have one LinkedIn user there who only dealers changed the rep comp plans when MPS was evolving. Pay on the profit of the page, volumes being managed. True. But as we know with the economy, people only do things when they have to, right? And when it was profitable for years, why would you? Josie says, love the idea of a webinar on compensation models. Yeah. So Ken, I think that's one we definitely got to throw into the, into the mix, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's Joe Barganier. Good to see you, Joe. Thanks for tuning in. All right. And Wes, I wonder if you have any other numbers that are kind of, startling or you think people should think about in respect to your time.
I wanted to set out that A3, A4 conversation just a little bit more. So I separated them out, and I mentioned the 12 volume tiers and the average of what was going on in that tier 1 scenario. But I separated out A3 and A4. So right now, A3, 31% of the A3 population lives in that first tier. So obviously we'd expect that to be less because A3 is a higher volume machine, higher duty cycle machine. But they're still only averaging 1,450 pages a month. That's just A3, right? And 95% of all the machines live in the first 5 volume tiers, not the rest, right? So generally you would think the sweet spot would be tier 6 because that's kind of dead center in the middle. And so that's where we would like to see most of those machines living. But they don't. They all live kind of at the opposite end, right? A4, 57% live in that very first volume tier, but they're only doing 285 pages a month, right? And the first 5 of those volume tiers average together is only 2,900 pages a month. So, the point being is that unit volume or page volume per unit has taken a hit as a function of the way our end users see print. Right? They were forced through the lockdown to find different ways of moving this information from place to place, and it wasn't on a piece of paper. That's not to say that their print is doomed. It's not. It's just changing. And as a function of that change, we need to start really looking at what we're doing, what kind of machines are we placing, and what volumes are they running, and which machine runs that volume the most profitably, so we can maintain the rich margins we're used to living with in this space.
Yeah, I love it. And it's a good message, for those out there. We're not saying that print is dead, but it definitely is changing. And as a consequence, we've got to keep pace, and our customers deserve that, right? And right. I can't thank you enough, Wes, for sharing those numbers today, because it shows us that we have the evidence, we have, an understanding of the way the market really is behaving. And, with numbers, we can make better decisions, right?
That's right.
Great. If people want to find out more, you can head over to nexera.net, and I'll just share my screen for a second so you can see the website. Really love all the stuff that you guys are doing over at Nexera, and you can see that for yourself. You come over here and look into some of their solutions. I know that Wes will be talking about some other things that you do at Nexera later on, right? So this is just one of the many ways that they can help you to make better decisions about how to evolve your business into the future. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And, one other thing, just a little plug for Ken and I, obviously, make sure that you check us out as well. You can actually join the group. We do have a business education series, obviously, which you've attended today. And you can find that on LinkedIn. You can see here, you'll be able to access all of the interviews that we've done, as well as see future upcoming interviews and things that are going to be happening in the future. So there you go.
And we'd love it if you follow the page.
Yes, absolutely. So get in there and follow. It says admin. That won't work for you. But if you do the number, the 15190-935, that'll get you there.
Yeah.
Well, Wes, thank you very much for joining us today. And
absolutely, gentlemen.
To everyone else that is tuned in with your questions and comments, we can't thank you enough. And remember, until next time, remember to keep leveling up your business.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We'll see everybody next week.